The SNP have been in power in Scotland for 17 years. They've got little to show for it. Above all, in what matters to them, what gets them out of bed in the morning, which is independence, separation from the rest of the United Kingdom. They've got nowhere on that.
Well, let's find out what all this means to the future of Scotland with the broadcaster Andrew Neil. Morning, Andrew.
Good morning.
How bad is this for the SNP?
Oh, it couldn't be worse. It's pretty existential for the First Minister, and it's pretty disastrous for the SNP. I mean, it's pretty much over for Mr. Yousaf. He could be gone before today is out. He could be gone over the weekend, or he could be gone sometime next week or sometime in May. We don't know exactly when, but he will be gone. It's finished. His time is over. Alex Salmond is right. He will be known as Humza the Brief. And he's just proved not up to the job. He was never the sharpest pencil in the box. He's managed to lose support all around him. His fate now hangs on a woman who used to be an MSP for the SNP, but she defected to Alex Salmond's party, a woman that he said when she left that she would be no great loss. Well, that no great loss is now the woman that could determine his short-term fate.
Was it an impossible job for Humza Yousaf, replacing Nicola Sturgeon, both after a long time with her as First Minister, but then given everything that's been going on in the party and the police investigation and so on, what was it an impossible job, or did he make a bad job worse?
Well, it was an impossible job because he's not up to it. So I think at any time he would have floundered and found it difficult. But it was, and I think the implication in your question is right, it was particularly difficult for him, given he wasn't up to it, in the manner in which he inherited it. You know, the SNP have been in power for longer than the Tories in Westminster now. We know how the Tories are doing in Westminster. They're cruising for a bruising. The SNP have been in power in Scotland for 17 years. They've got little to show for it. Above all, in what matters to them, what gets them out of bed in the morning, which is independence, separation from the rest of the United Kingdom. They've got nowhere on that. That is going nowhere. It was beginning to fray at the edges. Nicola Sturgeon had been allowed the Greens, a pretty extreme Green party, to take the SNP down very unpopular routes, from gender recognition to a terrible return bottling scheme. Everything they touched turned to dust. And so you add all that up together, it was not a good time. Plus, of course, the fact that Mick Plod, knacker of the Scotland Yard in Edinburgh, had been investigating the SNP for corruption. And of course, that has resulted in the arrest and charging of Nicola Sturgeon's husband. So not great, not something that even a very accomplished First Minister would have found easy, something that clearly has been totally beyond Mr. Yousaf.
Andrew, you've watched a lot of Scottish politics over the years, and there's been the ups and downs, the Labour Party's dominance, and then its collapse, and then the SNP's dominance, and teetering on the brink of independence. When you look at it now, do you just think that Keir Starmer's just the luckiest man in Britain?
Well, it's always been the case in Britain that it's very hard for Labour to form a majority in Westminster without Scotland. And Scotland used to regularly provide 40, 45 MPs for the Labour Party into Westminster. Now, it looks like Mr. Starmer is going to win by enough that he might not even need Scotland to form the next government. He may have a comfortable majority without it. But if, as looks likely, he's also got Scotland back on board, then that makes it pretty much a slam dunk that he becomes the next Prime Minister. There is a problem underneath all this party politics, though, in that Scotland is now in quite serious decline. After 17 years of SNP rule, the health service is a complete mess. They can't even build 2 bog standard ferries. Indeed, the ones they started in Turkey building look like they'll be ready before the ones that they started many years before trying to build in Scotland. And the Scottish education system, something I feel particularly strongly about as a product of it, which used to be among the best in the world, is now plummeting down the league tables. So whoever takes over from this mess of Mr. Yousaf, from the SNP, have got a real problem in Scotland. And I just add also, of course, that the financial sector in Scotland, which was always an integral part of the economy, never really recovered from the Great Crash, of which, of course, the Royal Bank of Scotland and the Bank of Scotland were two major casualties. And the North Sea oil and gas is running out, particularly running out because the Greens made sure that no one could really exploit it. So it's not a, whoever inherits this is not a happy inheritance in Scotland. When you look beyond the ups and downs of party politics, you see a proud, previously successful country now in quite serious decline.
And is that, would you put that down to spending so much time talking about, thinking about, campaigning for, producing policy documents on the issue of Scottish independence and not getting on with the day job?
I would put it down to two things. One, the one that you've just made, this obsession with independence above. I mean, you know, they're still producing independence papers, although there is no prospect of another referendum, no chance of independence for the foreseeable future. I would say no chance for at least a generation. Yesterday, they produced another independence paper on justice in an independent Scotland. Well, no one cares. Nobody gives a monkeys about that anymore. It's not going to happen. So this obsession meant they didn't get on with the day job, but also they presided over the domestic affairs of Scotland on those issues which are all wholly devolved to Scotland, above all health and education, what two things could matter more domestically, without a single attempt to reform these services or make them better. So the health services was just bung at more money, and that didn't do the job. The waiting lists are higher than ever. And on education, you know, other than the private schools, and one particular school that the West of Scotland elite sends its kids to, every school in Scotland is what Alistair Campbell called a bog standard comprehensive. There are no academies. There are no free schools. None of the reforms that were introduced under Tony Blair ever happened in Scotland. None that were introduced under Mr. Cameron or Michael Gove ever happened in Scotland. So there was no reform of the public sector whatsoever. And the consequence is that the public sector across the piece now performs worse than it does in England. And that's not exactly a high bar, to be even worse than what it is in England.
Just finally, Andrew, I know you're very plugged in. There's a rumour which has been sweeping around Westminster this week that Rishi Sunak might call the general election on Monday. The extent to which this is one person's thought, which has then been passed on to a sort of network of Chinese whispers, I'm not totally sure. I think the idea being that we'll all forget about how bad the local elections are if we're gearing up for a general election. What's your reading of it? Do you think he might be even tempted to do that?
I think there's no credibility in that at all. There is an argument going on in 10 Downing Street, which I'm quite surprised about, that some people think maybe they should cut and run and go in summer because they think they might cut their losses that way. I think that's complete nonsense. The only hope, and it's a very, very slight hope, the only hope the Tories have is holding on to late autumn when inflation could be down to 2% or even less. There could be growth back in the economy. There'd be another mini budget with a further cut in national insurance and so on. That at least may give them some kind of fighting chance, not to win, but maybe to mitigate the size of Labour's majority. If they want to go now, it just means they've given up the ghost and they are going to be thumped. So I doubt, you know, even turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So I would be amazed if the Tories decided to do that. If they did, it means they're just throwing in the towel. And politicians actually don't usually give up the perks of office until they really have to. And at the moment, they don't have to.
Andrew, always good to speak to you. Andrew Neil, thanks very much for joining us on Times Radio.